Chapter 3. Road to Veylmar. The first light of dawn spilled across the rolling hills, turning the silver grasses gold at their tips. The campfire had burned down to glowing coals, and the air was cool enough that the faint heat from the embers felt welcome. Izzi was already awake, perched on a flat stone beside the fire, hair loose and falling forward as she cleaned one of her daggers. She wore little more than a thin linen shift, the hem riding high over her thighs as she leaned forward. Kaelen was nearby, bare-chested, his scars catching the pale light, wearing only a pair of loose, dark trousers. He crouched over a small pan set on the coals, turning slices of bread and melted butter with one hand while the other sprinkled dried herbs. The smell was sharp and comforting all at once. Renlyn emerged from his bedroll looking like he'd woken in the middle of a dream and wasn't sure if he'd gone back to it. His gaze flicked once toward Izzi, then toward Kaelen, then immediately down to the grass at his feet. "You too," he began, rubbing at the back of his neck. "Don't, bother with morning clothes?" Izzi glanced over her shoulder, catching his reddened ears, and smiled like a cat that had just spotted a twitching tail. "What, this bothering you?" "You'll have to get used to it, Renlyn. Life on the road means no one's shy before breakfast." Kaelen didn't look up from the pan. "You're making him uncomfortable." "I'm making him aware," Izzi corrected, leaning back just enough to stretch, the motion pulling her shift a little higher. "There's a difference." Renlyn cleared his throat, his eyes darting anywhere but at her. I wasn't expecting to travel with you. Not after..." He trailed off, realizing the after. Kaelen finally looked at him, calm but deliberate. "You don't have to say it. They're not coming back. But you're useful." Renlyn blinked. "Useful?" Izzi tossed her clean dagger into its sheath with a lazy flick. "Runes," she said. "You can read them. Like your charm." Izzi showed the 2 runes she had in her pockets to the scribe. His brows drew together, trying to understand what he was looking at. "Maybe seems to be missing a rune." The only words he could make out were moon and water. "I don't know if I can..." "We know you can," Kaelen said simply, plating the bread and passing a slice to Izzi. "And we know you want to get to Veylmar anyway, so unless you've got better company waiting for you, it's a fair trade." Izzi bit into the bread, still smiling at Renlyn over the crust. "And besides, you'll get used to us. Maybe even like us." Renlyn muttered something that might have been, "I already do," under his breath, but Kaelen caught it, the corner of his mouth twitching just enough to suggest he'd file that away for later. The silver plains stretched out before them, the tall grass swaying in the morning breeze like a rippling sea. Their path wound along a faint dirt track, the horizon hazed with the faint outline of distant mountains. Renlyn kept pace beside Izzi, his steps more certain than the night before. "I want to stay with you," he said at last, the words careful but firm. Izzi tilted her head, studying him. "To help us out?" "Because..." He hesitated, eyes tracing the line of the hills ahead. "I've spent most of my life copying the words of dead men. This..." He gestured to the open road, the endless sky. "This is different. I want to see where it leads. And I think I could learn something from you both." "That," Kaelen said from a few paces ahead, "is a dangerous idea." Izzi laughed softly, stepping closer until her shoulder brushed his. "Don't listen to him. Learning's good for you, and runes." She slowed her steps just enough to keep him matching her pace. "Runes are something I've always wanted to understand." Renlyn glanced at her, startled by the genuine interest in her voice. "Most people think they're just old symbols. Decorative. And they're wrong," Izzi said easily. "I've seen them on vault doors, in old temples, even on the edge of blades. There's power in them, isn't there?" "Yes," he said, his voice gaining a little more confidence. "The kind of power people forget until they open the wrong door." She smiled at that, slipping her arm around his shoulders without warning, her fingers hooking lightly over the strap of his satchel. "Then you and I should make sure we're the ones opening the right ones." Renlyn's cheeks warmed, but he didn't shy away from her touch this time. Instead, he let the corner of his mouth turn up just enough to hint at a smile. Kaelen glanced over his shoulder once, watching the 2 of them, his expression unreadable. Then he turned back to the road. The sun climbed higher as they walked, the early chill giving way to the warm shimmer of midday. The dirt path curved between low, sloping ridges until a squat stone building came into view, a roadside trading post with a faded sign swaying lazily in the breeze. A handful of wagons were hitched nearby, and the faint hum of conversation drifted from the open doorway. Kaelen stopped at the edge of the yard. We should take on water and a few days' rations. Veylmar's still 2 days out if the roads stay clear. Renlyn adjusted the strap of his satchel, eyes on the building. Places like this, they've never been easy for me. I've always been more comfortable with parchment than people. Izzi gave him a sideways look, her smile gentle instead of teasing. Good thing you're with me then. Watch closely, you might learn a trick or two. Inside, the air was cooler, smelling faintly of dried herbs and old wood. Shelves crowded with jars, sacks, and bundles of cloth lined the walls, and behind the counter an older woman with sharp eyes was counting coins into a wooden tray. Izzi stepped forward like she'd known the woman her whole life, leaning casually on the counter. Afternoon, love. That sun's brutal out there. You must be parched. The woman blinked at the sudden warmth in her tone. A bit, I suppose. Izzi's smile deepened, not in mockery but in shared understanding. Let me take some of that weight off your shoulders. We'll be needing water, bread, maybe a little dried meat if you've got it, and I promise not to haggle too hard if you tell me how your day's been. The woman's sternness softened, and she began filling a small crate with supplies. Renlyn stood beside Izzi, watching the easy way she asked small questions about the woman's family, the weather, the state of the road, listening as if every answer mattered. By the time the crate was full, the price she named was lower than the posted rate. As they stepped back outside, Renlyn exhaled, almost in disbelief. You didn't even argue with her. I didn't have to, Izzi said, adjusting the crate in her arms. People aren't numbers, Renlyn. Make them feel seen and you'll get farther than any coin can buy. He nodded slowly, the thought settling deeper than her words alone. Kaelen fell into step beside them, taking the crate from Izzi without a word, and the three set off again toward the long stretch of road ahead. The last edge of the sun slipped beneath the plains, leaving the horizon painted in molten gold and violet. Their small camp sat on a gentle rise near a creek, the sound of running water mingling with the faint rustle of tall grass swaying in the breeze. Kaelen worked in his steady, methodical way, pitching the tent and staking down the ropes while Izzi and Renlyn gathered kindling. The work was simple, but for Renlyn the road had left his mind wandering. The runes of Veylmar. His master had spoken of them like they were priceless relics, not in gold or jewels but in meaning. Yet, the more Renlyn thought on it, the less he believed the purpose was purely scholarly. Too much secrecy, too much urgency, the kind of obsession that didn't come from history alone. When the fire finally took, it bloomed with warmth that softened the chill in the air. Izzi settled cross-legged near the flames, her hair loose from its braid, catching the flicker of firelight in strands that shimmered almost copper. She had shed her outer layers, keeping only a loose linen tunic that fell high on her thighs and left one shoulder bare. The skin of wine rested at her side. She caught him looking and offered the wineskin with a small tilt of her head. Come on, Renlyn, you've been quiet all day. Drink with me. He hesitated, then took it. The first swallow was warmer than he expected, trailing heat down his chest. I'm not used to this, he admitted, passing it back. What? Sitting by a fire with friends? He managed a small smile. Friends who've killed 2 men since I met them, yes. She laughed, a soft, easy sound. That's nothing. You should see us on a busy week. They talked. It began with the road, how much farther to Veylmar, what happened with the 2 guards, the state of the bridge crossings, but drifted quickly to things that mattered more. Avaren and their quest. Renlyn found himself telling her about the first time he traced a rune from an ancient vault door, how it had felt like pressing his hand against something that could still remember the touch of its maker. Izzi listened without interruption, her chin resting on her knee, eyes steady on his. You've got more passion for this than most adventurers I've met, she said. I like that. You're not chasing gold, you're chasing meaning. He didn't know how to respond to that. In truth, her attention felt different from anything he'd experienced. It wasn't just her beauty, though, stars help him, she was beautiful. It was the way she leaned in when he spoke, the way her gaze seemed to hold him still without pinning him down. For her part, Izzi was finding Renlyn unexpectedly endearing. He wasn't the rough-edged mercenary or sly charmer she was used to sparring with. There was something earnest about him, and the way he spoke about runes, like they were alive, made her want to know more. He was greener than he liked to admit, but there was potential there. Potential in more ways than one. They passed the wine back and forth until the fire burned lower and the stars came out in earnest. Renlyn leaned back to gesture at something in the sky, his palms slipping on the grass. The next moment he was forward, his weight on her, their faces so close she could feel the brush of his breath. They froze. His eyes darted down to her lips, then away again, his heartbeat pounding against her chest. "So," Izzi said softly, almost whispering, "what are you going to do now?" A smile coating her face. Renlyn's breath caught. For half a second, the night seemed to hold its breath with him. Then, panic or instinct, he wasn't sure which, took over. He pushed himself upright so fast it almost looked clumsy. "Good night," he blurted, and hurried to his bedroll like a man fleeing a battlefield. Izzi stayed where she was, gazing after him for a moment before stretching out by the fire. A slow smile curled her lips as she closed her eyes. "That one's gonna come around eventually," she thought. "I think a good lay is in my future." Kaelen glanced up from the far side of the fire, his expression unreadable but his eyes glinting faintly in the firelight. The morning came cool and clear, the silver plains glittering with dew under the pale light. The fire had burned to ash, and a thin mist clung low to the creek beyond camp. Izzi was already awake, humming tunelessly to herself as she packed her gear. Kaelen emerged from the shadows of the ridge where he'd been scouting the early trail, his broad frame cutting a dark silhouette against the rising sun. He watched her for a long moment before speaking. "You're in a good mood. I slept well," Izzi said, her tone bright as ever. She gave him a quick, knowing smile. "You?" He didn't answer right away, just crossed his arms and looked at her like a man deciding how much trouble he wanted to spare himself. "We need him." Izzi's brow arched. "Renlyn? I'm well aware. He's our rune reader." "Then maybe don't," Kaelen said, his voice calm but carrying that edge she knew meant he wasn't joking. "Don't start something you can't finish. He's green and we can't risk losing him over whatever you're thinking." She sighed, rolling her eyes. "I wasn't planning anything." He gave her a flat look. "All right, maybe I was considering something," she admitted with a smirk. "But you act like I'm going to drag him into the bushes before breakfast." "That's exactly what I'm saying," Kaelen replied, deadpan. Izzi threw her hands up in mock defeat. "Fine, scribes off limits. Strictly professional. You have my word." The words came easily, but her smile faltered for just a breath as she turned back to her pack. She hated being told no, especially when it came to something she wanted. From the other side of camp, Renlyn stirred in his bedroll, oblivious to the exchange. Izzi glanced over her shoulder at him, her eyes narrowing slightly in thought before she forced her tone light again. "You're no fun, you know that?" Kaelen's answer was the faintest ghost of a smile before he moved past her to check the trail ahead. By midday, the sun beat down with a warm, drowsy weight. In the distance, a small caravan shimmered through the heat. 3 sturdy wagons drawn by mules, travelers walking in loose clusters along the road. Kaelen slowed his pace, letting Izzi and Renlyn close in beside him. "We'll meet them on the next rise," he said, scanning the group ahead. Then, with a pointed glance to both, he added, "And remember what happened at the last caravan. Keep your eyes open. Keep your hands to yourselves until we know who we're dealing with." Izzi smirked. "You're no fun. You know we're dealing with Celine, remember?" Kaelen replied flatly. Renlyn looked at them a bit awkwardly. He knew the name Celine they spoke of, but nothing much more than small detail of her appearance. When the two groups finally met, the usual road greetings passed between them, quick questions about weather, bandits, and the state of the bridges ahead. Izzi hung back a step, her gaze wandering lazily over the travelers, reading them like she might be in a room in a tavern. Renlyn didn't have the same luxury. One of the caravan's younger women, bright-eyed, wearing a pale scarf that caught the sunlight, gravitated toward him almost immediately. She asked where they were headed, what business they had in Veylmar, and at one point let her fingertips graze his forearm when she laughed at one of his awkward half-jokes. Renlyn answered politely but stiffly, clearly unaccustomed to the attention. More than once, his eyes drifted toward Izzi, quick glances he thought went unnoticed. Izzi noticed. Oh, she noticed. And while she took a certain satisfaction in it, Kaelen's earlier warnings still rang in her ears. That's when she saw her. Walking alongside the last wagon was a woman in her late 20s, her skin a warm bronze under the sun, her hair a cascade of dark curls spilling over one shoulder. Her deep green tunic, belted snug at the waist, showed the lithe strength in her frame, and a dagger rested at her hip with the wear of frequent use. There was confidence in her stride, and when her eyes met Izzi's, there was a moment's pause, sharp, appraising, and edged with something almost playful. Izzi slid closer to Kaelen, speaking under her breath. "The one in green. Can I?" Kaelen's eyes followed her nod. He hesitated a beat, then gave a resigned grunt. "Fine. But if this turns into a repeat of the last caravan, you're explaining it to me while I'm cleaning my swords." Izzi grinned like a cat. "Relax. I'm all charm this time." She drifted toward the woman in green, falling into step beside her as if she belonged there. Her voice softened, her smile shifting into something warmer, more deliberate. The woman answered in kind, the edges of her own smile tugging higher. Behind them, Renlyn managed to free himself from the scarfed girl's attention, but his gaze quickly found Izzi again, lingering a little too long on the way she leaned in toward the other woman, fingers brushing the curve of her arm in casual familiarity. He said nothing, but Kaelen noticed. Kaelen always noticed. The woman in green had a voice like dark honey, smooth, rich, and just a little dangerous if you had too much of it. Up close, Izzi could see the fine lines of sun and wind on her face, the mark of someone who'd spent her life under open skies. Her dagger hung at her hip, worn but well cared for, and the curve of her smile said she knew exactly how to use it. "You're not with the caravan," the woman said, her gaze sweeping over Izzi like she was weighing her worth in silver. "No," Izzi replied, meeting her eyes without flinching. "Passing through. Heading for Veylmar." She let her voice drop a note lower. "And maybe a little fun along the way." That earned her a small, knowing chuckle. "I'm Salaya," the woman offered, shifting the strap of her pack on her shoulder. The motion pulled the green tunic taut across her chest, a move that might have been accidental, or not. "Izzi," the elf returned, brushing her fingers along Salaya's arm as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Her touch was feather-light but deliberate, testing the waters. Salaya's eyes dipped to the hand, then back up, a spark there now. "You always this friendly with strangers?" "Only the ones worth my time," Izzi said, her grin edged with heat. A few paces back, Renlyn watched with an expression he probably thought was subtle, but the stiffness in his shoulders gave him away. His gaze flicked from the way Izzi leaned in to the sly curl of Salaya's lips, and something between frustration and jealousy tightened in his chest. Kaelen saw it instantly. Without a word, he stepped up beside Renlyn, placing a broad hand on his shoulder. "Walk with me," Kaelen said. Renlyn blinked. Come on," Kaelen cut in, steering him toward the other side of the caravan. As they moved away, Renlyn glanced back, just in time to see Izzi laugh at something Salaya said, her head tilted, firelight dancing in her hair despite the midday sun. Salaya leaned closer, her hand brushing Izzi's waist in a way that made Renan's pulse spike. Kaelen, catching the look, spoke without turning his head. "You keep staring like that, you're going to trip over your own feet." Renlyn scowled. "I'm not, you are," Kaelen said flatly. "And it's not doing you any favors." Behind them, the two women walked in lockstep, their conversation soft and punctuated by the kind of glances that said both of them knew exactly what game they were playing. Laughter spilled between them, bright enough to draw a few curious glances from the caravan, but Izzi and Salaya hardly noticed. Salaya's eyes caught Izzi's, glimmering with something unspoken. "Come with me," Salaya said, her voice soft and certain. Izzi tilted her head. "You always lure elves into the woods, or am I special?" "Only the elves, worth my time," Salaya replied, already stepping toward the darkened tree line. They slipped into the forest, the warmth of the fires fading behind them until only moonlight and the rustle of leaves remained. The air was cooler here, sharp with the scent of moss and earth. Salaya walked close, their arms brushing, a light contact that lingered longer each time. When they reached a clearing, Salaya stopped and turned, her eyes running the length of Izzi's form. "You've been at me all night," she said. "Maybe," Izzi answered, closing the gap between them until their chests touched. The first kiss was slow, deliberate, but deepened quickly. Salaya's hands slid to Izzi's waist, fingers curling into the fabric of her tunic before tugging it upward. Izzi let her, raising her arms so the garment slid away, the night air cool against her bare skin. Izzi's own hands traced up Salaya's sides, finding the hem of her green tunic and pulling it free. The soft brush of fingertips turned into the press of palms against warm, bare skin, exploring the curve of a spine, the slope of shoulders. They kissed again, harder this time, until Salaya guided Izzi down onto the moss. Clothing was shed in unhurried movements, the faint whisper of fabric, the heat of skin meeting skin. They moved against each other in the moonlit clearing, hands mapping each line and hollow, memorizing by touch as much as by sight. Izzi's fingers tangled in Salaya's hair, Selaya's lips found her collarbone, her hip, the small hollow just above her waist. The night wrapped around them like a secret, their breaths quickening, bodies fitting together as if they had always known how. When they finally stilled, they lay tangled on the moss, Selaya's hand idly stroking Izzi's bare breast. Izzi's smile was slow, her voice a low murmur. "You're trouble," Izzi whispered and out of breath. "And you're still here," Selaya replied without opening her eyes. The forest had grown still by the time they pulled apart, both of them breathing softly in the silvered dark. Selaya smoothed a hand over Izzi's hair, her smile half sated, half regretful. "I'll see you on the road," she murmured. "Or somewhere more interesting," Izzi replied, her grin warm and unhurried. They dressed without haste, each watching the other in those quiet moments that feel heavier than words. Then Selaya melted back into the trees, swallowed by the night. Izzi returned toward the glow of camp, her step light, her tunic hanging loose, hair slightly mussed by more than the wind. The warmth in her expression wasn't the kind given by a good joke or a well-poured drink. It was deeper, quieter, the satisfaction of a hunger met. Kaelen noticed first, glancing up from the log where he sat sharpening his blade. His gaze flicked over her once, and the corner of his mouth tugged in the faintest, most knowing smirk. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. Renlyn, however, looked up from where he sat near the fire and froze. His eyes darted over her disheveled hair, the faint color in her cheeks, the languid ease in her movements. His stomach tightened as an image bloomed in his mind, unbidden and impossible to push away. Izzi and the woman in green in the shadows, close and tangled, hands exploring, lips parting. He swallowed hard, his gaze dropping quickly to the ground, but the heat in his chest didn't fade. The voices of the camp blurred around him, the fire popping sharply in the silence of his thoughts. Izzi, meanwhile, dropped into a seat across from him, stretching out her legs toward the fire. "Miss me?" she asked lightly. Kaelen snorted. Renlyn forced a small smile, but when she turned her attention elsewhere, his eyes found her again, and the question of what exactly had passed between her and Selaya burned in the back of his mind, refusing to leave. The fire had burned low, its glow pulsing gently across the camp. Izzi was asleep, sprawled in her bedroll, one knee bent and a loose blanket pulled haphazardly over her waist. She looked peaceful in the firelight, though there was still a faint, knowing curl to her smile. Kaelen sat across from Renlyn, slowly working a whetstone along his blade. The scribe's eyes kept drifting toward Izzi, then back to the embers, as though he was afraid of being caught staring. "You thinking about her?" Kaelen asked quietly. Renlyn stiffened. No, I mean, yes. Maybe." Kaelen gave a faint smile but didn't look up from his work. "Then think about this. Do you know what you want from her? And more importantly, do you know what she might want from you?" Renlyn frowned slightly, unsure how to answer. "I'm not sure yet. She's just different." "She is," Kaelen agreed. "Izzi's the kind of woman who makes you feel like you've stepped into a story. She's quick, charming, and she'll pull you along into places you never expected to be. But that comes with a cost. She doesn't stay anywhere for long, not places, not people." Renlyn's gaze flicked to her again. "You're saying I shouldn't?" "I'm saying," Kaelen interrupted gently, "that you need to be honest with yourself before you get pulled under. If you can take her as she is, the good, the wild, the unpredictable, then fine. But if you're looking for something steady, something you can hold on to, you might want to guard your heart now, before it's too late." Renlyn was quiet, processing the words. "You speak like someone who's been there." Kaelen's eyes softened. "I've been close enough to know what happens, and I'd rather you be clear about what you're stepping into than find out the hard way." They sat in silence for a while, the fire cracking softly. Eventually, Kaelen slid his sword back into its sheath. "Rest, Renlyn. Tomorrow will come fast." Renlyn lay back, eyes on the stars above, Kaelen's words circling in his head. He didn't know yet what he wanted from Izzi. She was different, or maybe just a true companion. Having each other's backs.
Thank you for listening. Please like, comment, and subscribe. More chapters are on the way.